third quarter audit committee meeting. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're going to do a roll call first.
Chairperson Ferguson.
Here.
Vice Chair Bertrand.
Here.
Member Bagwell.
Here.
Member Mayhorn.
Here.
Member Strasburg. A quorum's present.
Okay, thank you. Public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant or within the authority of the Carson City Audit Committee. In order for members of the public to participate in the committee's consideration of an agenda item, the committee strongly encourages members of the public to comment on the agenda item during the item itself. No action may be taken on a matter raised under public comment unless the item has been specifically included in the agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Any public comments? Doesn't look like it. Thank you. All right, next item's number 4, approval of the May 9th minutes. Any comments, questions, concerns on the minutes from the May 9th?
I move to accept the minutes for the May 9th, 2019 meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Adoption of the agenda. Any changes to the agenda as it stands right now? Doesn't appear so. Next is the meeting items. Item 6A for possible action discussion and possible action regarding the monitoring review, closure of internal audit findings and recommendations included in the audit findings tracking report, and provide recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to close completed findings or recommendations. Take it away, Sherry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on page 1 of this item, we've added the temporary staffing in the fire department overtime to this tracking sheet as Eide Bailey finishes audits and they're accepted by this committee. We add them here. Page 2 is the capital projects process review. It's actually about 3 or 4 pages long. And on the bottom of the first page, there's an August 2019 update. The only thing that is really changed on here is the expected completion date for their PM manual has changed from July 2019 to December of 2019. They simply were not able to get this completed in time. He said they're really close, but with all the ERP and all the projects they have going on, they just couldn't get it done.
Okay.
So that's really all I wanted to mention on that one is we did change that date. And there's about 4 items that rely on that PM manual to get completed, so I changed it throughout. There are no changes to the fiscal year 18 audit findings. Again, I was going to hold this until the 19 external auditor clears them. So once the 19 auditor clears them, then I'll let you know and we can close these. The temporary staffing, we had 5 findings. The first finding, the DA has performed some research. However, he's not quite done yet. He believes he'll be done on October 31st. There's just a question about the definition of employee relationship that he's trying to nail down. Item number 2, this is regarding the timesheets and what Marathon will accept. And so I need to, and I have not done this yet, but I need to speak with, we had the ERP implementation and everything, so I will get to this. I'm hoping by December 31st, 2019, but I'm going to speak with departments and see if I can narrow it down to 2 timesheets. One being Marathon's simple, easy one-pager that they offer, and the other being more of a spreadsheet with all the necessary information and sign-offs. So I'm hoping as long as we get it down to 2 formats that Marathon accepts and all the departments are okay with, we can close this item. And then item 3, 4, and 5, I'm recommending closure today. I included the policy and the form, and this is actively working. We've had some come to IFC and for approval, and the departments all know how to fill it out. They've been trained. I think these items can be closed. Did you guys want to discuss closing those before we move on, or you want me to move on and then go back and discuss? Okay. The next is the fire department overtime hours audit. Item number 1, the telestaff. They're in the middle of an update on telestaff right now, and in that update, they're adding all these codes. So they said they should be done by the end of September with the update on this. And then number two, I'm kind of looking for direction because I don't think we can do an accurate, well, we can't guarantee the 6 new positions will reduce overtime significantly enough to cause a zero effect on the budget. So I'm not sure if we want to, the recommendation being hiring 6 new people, if we want to keep this open until we come up with a solution, or we want to say, no, we're not going to hire 6 new people. We're going to look at this in a different way and take it off of the sheet. The chief has come up with what might be a great solution. It's a FEMA Safer Staffing Grant. And I'm not sure how many people this is, but it would pay for 75% of employee costs for the first 2 years and then 35% on the 3rd year. And then, so this could get us some extra firefighters, and we could at that time figure if those extra firefighters actually help overtime. And then it would give us the data we need in that time frame to go back and look at the codes and find out what we're using overtime for and do a real good analysis. So I'm looking for a little direction here. I'm not really sure where we want to go.
Wasn't there some kind of union contract consideration too that we had to take into account on this?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe we can have the chief come up and maybe we can just ask a few questions and kind of
Yeah.
see if we're on the right mission or path with what we're trying to accomplish here. So just to go back a little bit with the reminder, we had the audit that kind of went through the reasoning for overtime, and we determined, number one, which was, we need a little more defined codes so that you even have any information to target where is the overtime and can we actually do something to eliminate that particular overtime reason? Is there staffing or something that we can do in that arena? And if I recall, one of the major components that you discussed with us last time before, somewhere in there, previously, that's a better word, was that you had a lot of vacancies. If I'm not mistaken, there was a lot of vacancies going on, and so you had a lot of filling issues where people were having to do overtime there. And then on the bargaining agreement, what we were considering is adding 6 staff, but maybe looking that you were going to change back to paramedic only, that the overtime really is in the ambulance service. Am I on the right? I mean, that's where a lot of overtime comes in also. And so that there was some opportunities to work with the union to potentially change the contract to the levels of employment. Am I on the right memory?
Sure. So Sean Simon, Fire Chief. You are correct in some portions of that. So reverting back to some of the earlier comments, yes, in the summer of 2018, which would have put us in fiscal year 19, if I'm correct, we were down 8 positions. And then in addition to that, our normal daily staffing, we have 17 members assigned to a shift. There are 3 shifts. They work a 56-hour work week. And within that, there is a minimum staffing of 15 personnel on duty every day. And that provides for 3 fire engines with 3 people on it and 3 ambulances with 2 people on each ambulance. So that gives us our 15. So at full staffing, we have 17 personnel. So we have 2 additional personnel to relieve or limit the amount of overtime. They fill in on vacation relief and other assignments. During that period of time in 18, we had we were down 8 positions on top of that. So obviously, those extra bodies were no longer there, and we were still short in addition to vacation staffing and everything. So, and it was an extremely busy fire season. The previous 2 summers, last summer and the summer before, have been very, very busy fire seasons. Knock on wood, we've not been too bad this year. We actually just sent our first engine out this weekend. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a background on why we believe we had somewhat of a spike in the overtime over the last 2 years. And then we talked about hiring and replacing firefighters, that process. We're in that process right now. So we, just this last week, we worked with our HR department, who did a fantastic job. But we went through the basic portions of the testing process for new recruits. This week, we will do chief's interviews, which is later this week, and they will start an academy October 21st. That's a 3-month academy, a 12-week academy to prepare them to be firefighters and paramedics within our organization. We won't see them on our fire engines or our ambulances until late January, early February. So your hiring lag time at the time of a test is really 6 months before we see them on board. And that's fairly standard between the background side where we check references, make sure they're good people, the people that they tell us they are, and then the training side of that. So we get about 6 months before we bring somebody on. So the day we have a vacancy, it's typically a minimum of 6 months before we bring somebody on to fill that position. So that was one of the reasons, speeding up to the last part, why one of the recommendations I think we can look at is adding additional personnel to our, what we would call extra staffing. So above the 17, maybe go to a 19, which would be 6 bodies, 2 per shift. And that would give us a few extra people to limit a little bit of the hit when we have retirees or resignations at that time. We'd have a few extra bodies on board that may limit some of that overtime. It won't eliminate it. And one of the things we discussed last time is the employee costs. So a new employee, their pay is obviously 100%, and then their benefits are averaging right around 60%. So they're what we would call 160%. An overtime rate is 150%, time and a half of just the salary. We're not adding the benefits. So in the long run, it is less expensive to operate in an overtime world than it is to bring extra bodies on. But there are a couple things that tie to that. One is the health of the organization. And if you work your firefighters too often, or any organization, their leave time is going to increase. Your burnout increases. A 56-hour work week is obviously 16 hours more than a normal person's work week. So that and additional overtime on top of that, you're looking at firefighters on the average, some of them working 72 plus hours per week. That's a short term, okay. Long term, you have to look in the health and welfare of the firefighter themselves, and what, from a fiscal point of view, how much does that cost? If they have mental health issues, if they have increased sick leave, if we know when they are tired and are still doing a physically demanding job, their risk of injury increases, which now causes another vacancy as they are off healing and recuperating. So there's a trickle effect to that I think it would be extremely difficult to put a factual number to. But I would look at our organization and say, yes, our overtime is a little high, and one of the reasons, or the driving reasons, is lack of extra personnel to cover those shifts. It's not that the overtime itself is, I see it from a side view that, yeah, that is a high number, but it's less expensive than bringing people on. But as a fire chief, I'm very concerned, both fiscally, but more importantly, about the health and welfare of my firefighters. So that is why one of the things that we are recommending or looking at is the FEMA Safer Grant. And so a FEMA Safer Grant is a 3-year grant. You can apply for as many personnel as you want. You have to justify that. And so we can put a number of 6 firefighters in there, which would give us 2 extra per shift. We could do 9, which would give us 3 extra per shift. We could do at any number. You have to justify it. There's a whole bunch of documentation you have to provide in national standards and how you're going to improve the organization. I would think we would be fairly competitive in that grant process. And the grant process, as Sherry had stated, pays for 75% of the employee's salary and benefits the first 2 years, and then that drops to 35% at the 3rd year. After 3 years, there is no commitment to keep those employees. So it is something that we can look at, and I think it would be well received on the fire department side, as we would require our firefighters to work less overtime, and give us a little bit more leeway in how we staff our apparatus from that perspective. Also, one of the things we talked about last time, because nothing is simple, is when we go above our current staffing levels right now, we're at our ceiling by a contract on the number of people allowed off. If we go above that number, which this would take us, they'd get one additional day off or vacation day per shift. But if we did the 9, so we did 3 extra firefighters per shift, holler at me if I'm losing you, we would be able to cover that and then some, and we would expect to see a fairly decent dip in our overtime. And I think it's a good way to look at it from a fiscal point of view, as Sherry mentioned, as we go along. And the city wouldn't be bearing the full cost until the 4th year.
So just as a thought process, I don't know, again, I recognize the bargaining unit. Do you think if this was considered a pilot project, that the union would maybe be willing to say, since this doesn't require us to permanently accept it, the objective is to see if we're going to get the desired result, right? So we're going to potentially go and get this grant. Let's say I just went with 6, because I want to overall believe that I can implement the project without the grant. Well, so if we went for 9, I think that'd be a heavier lift.
Sure.
For us to fiscally support that. So do you think that the relation could be good enough that for the 3-year, you could maybe get a waiver for the pilot project?
On the vacation staffing?
That they'd say, hey, this is just a pilot, and then if it's implemented and we carry it on after the grant goes, then you kick in the agreement.
We can certainly have those discussions. I think reality is, and from their perspective, and I've already had some discussions with them on this, through their historical recollection, and so wasn't here during the initial contract phases and pre-recession. They had 3 people off with the staffing that they have today, so they already see that they've already given up that. So that was one of the recession counters, I said, so to speak. So I think my guess is that they would be fairly strong on the need for the 3rd vacation board if we're adding additional people.
I just
So,
think it defeats the whole, almost defeats the purpose.
And
If you
that's
get
why I was
one
looking-
more up, yeah, but I don't
Yeah.
have the money for 9, so I have to think about that. We'd have to actually pencil that
Sure,
out, because where am I going to get the money to support 9 new officers?
sure.
Or 9 new firemen, but yikes. 6, I think we kind of had in my mind. I'm squirreling away the cash, don't you know? Yeah.
Yes,
But, okay, because that's kind of what I thought, that as a pilot, I could strongly support that, to say, instead of guessing on whether or not it has an impact, you have an opportunity to watch it work.
sure.
And then say, yes, we're on the right path, or we still end up with as much overtime plus the cost of the
Yeah.
6.
I know 2251, the union would be open to discussing anything, but, I think in the previous discussions that I've had with them, they're going to be fairly strong on that stance.
And I think the days off, it's, there's like 51 firefighters, I believe, right now. And so every year, they've got a certain number of weeks they can take off. Well, if only 2 of those 50 can be off at one time, it really limits when they can take their vacation. So if we're adding another 6, then there can be 3 off at one time. So I realize they have to be covered, but I think that's why there's a need for 6 people. So there's enough to cover that extra person that's off each week. So they're not getting any extra overtime. It's just taking extra, one more person not there.
It's a quandary.
If we applied for the grant, when would it kick in?
So applications are not open yet, and it's a fairly short window. So we're looking The latest updates we've gotten from FEMA is look for a late fall, early winter application period, so probably November, December. They've been running pretty behind even on their awards for the last year's grants. So I could see that getting pushed a little bit more. Typically, you won't see awards made until at least springtime, if not summer. So we probably, if we applied for it in November, December, I think if we got an early award, we wouldn't see that award until June or July. And then you have the hiring process and everything. So we would probably be looking at this time next year, if we got an early award, to bringing anybody on.
Which actually fits a budget cycle, which I personally adore. I like things to be able to be brought up during a budget process, but, I guess it's really a discussion for us to say. We would just be recommending the going for a grant, not necessarily what the union, I don't know, that's the question. Or do you think we just,
I think as the audit committee, I mean, we don't want to micromanage the departments. I think we're here to, we have a finding, bring it up, and then hear what you have to say about it. And then after that, I think that's pretty much up to you, to address it. But yeah, I don't think we need to direct them and how they solve that. So as long as it's being addressed in a manner that I think seems acceptable and they're going for it, I think that concludes it. Any comments I have.
I personally really like the idea of the FEMA grant because it's going to pay for those, most of the, 75% of those 6 guys, so we can see if the overtime really reduces. If it doesn't, well, then we don't.
Well,
get 6 new
again,
guys.
I think that's kind of outside the scope of what we're doing. I mean, I think that's more the decision, for staff and manager, because, I mean, I guess we can debate that whether it's, but it sounds good to me. So,
Yeah,
so I
me as
don't see any
well.
problems in that. But again, that's kind of I think it's a good good solution. I don't think as this committee that we want to be micromanaging what they're doing. So if you in analyzing and looking at it feel like that's probably a good way to go, I don't see any issues unless anybody else has anything to say about it.
So I guess my question on this second finding of the fire department overtime hours, do we want to keep this open for years until we have it solved? Or do we want to close it and say we're going for the FEMA? Because either we're going to implement the recommendation or we're not, right? So,
Yeah, I think it's up to staff to come up with a recommendation, get it approved by the Board of Supervisors.
you guys
I'll
recommend.
I'll run something else up at the flagpole. It is the job of the audit committee to recommend the methodology for closure of any of the audit findings. And so we either, as the audit committee, say, yes, we concur with the hiring, first of all, of the 6. So that's, to me, the nutshell. And then you can say, as an audit committee, that we're okay with whichever process that they look at for that hiring. So the first question we have, do we agree that we need to look at hiring 6 additional firefighters? And if we agree with that, then we can also say we don't see any issue with the recommendation of saving the taxpayers money, because and correct me if I'm wrong or I misunderstood, you indicated in the grant that there's no requirement that we would have to continue the 6. If we find it not to be beneficial to us at the end of the 3-year, to me, pilot, then the Board of Supervisors, or we could have the audit committee review the results. We could send that as one of those, we'll do it later, where we check the results and they say, yes, it was effective that you hired the 6, or no, you should have picked 9, or
Like validation.
the validation of it, if that makes sense. So I think right, and we don't have to continue them, is what you said. There's
That is
no
correct.
condition in the grant to keep them.
The condition is for 3 full years, and at that point, it is up to the individual agency. And I've worked with these grants before, and one of the ways that, you don't necessarily have to give pink slips right away. You can go through attrition as we would still anticipate. If we had 6 still on the staff at that time, as retirees and vacancies occur, we would not fill those until we dropped back to our current staffing levels.
Does that make sense what I'm saying then? So it's overall, we're saying, yes, we concur with, I like a pilot for the 6 because I often, some of these recommendations are always nebulous, right? Will it indeed have the expected result? You may wish to consider X, you may wish to consider Y. Well, great. Or did we just spend more money? But I also like the thought of reducing the workload. I mean, we get an extra byproduct
Correct.
here, which is reducing the workload on the existing firefighters, but also, in all honesty, I'd rather all the firefighters be at peak because I think they do everything they can to strive at their peak performance at all times, but
Absolutely.
I'm not naive enough to believe at hour 72, I'm the same as I am at hour 56.
Correct.
And so I think it's also a public benefit to have fresh firefighters, that the majority are working 56 hours unless it's an all hands on deck because we have a forest
Major
fire on
incident.
Sea Hill. But
Sure.
if that makes sense. So maybe ours is just, yes, we concur with the 6.
Sounds reasonable to me.
I guess the question for us then is, do we keep this on or not? I think if there's a plan that we approve of, I guess we can approve it. It's just a matter of if we validate it later, but we can close it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
I think we make the recommendation for them that we like the FEMA grant and then we close it because either they get the grant and the board approves it or they don't. It wouldn't have to come back here other than if it is approved, we pick it up later in a validation to whether or not we continue the positions. So,
I got a question. I guess that gets back to, is that really our role to decide if they continue a position or not?
only if we pick it up in a validation. If we pick it up in the validation. Did it fix it? Right. Did it indeed reduce overtime, which is the validation.
Require a follow-up review, right?
See, yeah, that'd be our
Limited scope follow-up.
Right.
Okay. So I think we're agreeing that we can close this item.
Yeah, I think what do you guys think? 1 and 2, close them both
Yes.
Yep.
on the fire. And then we have to go backwards on the other one.
You know, just to go back over when we set this system up and we were doing this, I think it's a matter of just tracking. We come up with our audit findings and we present that to you, and it's really to help you and to help the department heads to know what needs to be done. So I think once we get it back to you, if there's something that seems reasonable to close it, I think at that point, we're ready to close them unless they just haven't addressed it well. And then our next step is to validate. You know, it could be at a later time, we pull it out and look at it and see. So I think this pretty much accomplishes what our goal of is this. We identified the problem, you come back and identified some viable solutions. And I think we reward him by taking it off the list.
No, we like to have them come and visit us every meeting.
And I really thank you for the discussion today. This was excellent. This is what I was hoping for. And then can we go back to the temporary staffing? Okay. And that's items 3, 4, and 5 that I was hoping to close. We've got the policy in place. They're already going to IFC, the form.
So can we have the HR director, I just want to do a little bit of validation and then I'm.
Good afternoon, Melanie Bruchetta, Human Resources Director.
So thank you so much for getting right on this and getting the forms and everything into place. As most of you know, this one was pretty near and dear to my heart, that I really wanted a documented system for doing this. And so my question really comes into when it goes to IFC, and you said you've already put this in place and had some go. And so that's really what my question is. Does IFC really feel they have the ability to deny it? I just want to make sure that we just didn't set up forms that are pro forma, do you see that any of the directors, when they use the initial forms, came to a different conclusion? You know, that they go, oh, I'm not gonna hire a temporary. I guess I'm looking for, is it actually functional and making people think about the hiring processes and the right methodologies? Do you find it working?
I do find it working. When I get the form first as the HR director, and I will put it on the IFC agenda. If I find that the employee should be a direct hire, I'll ask the department why they aren't hiring this position as a direct hire versus going through Marathon to save the administrative fee that we're getting. Ultimately, IFC, the only voting member in IFC, the only person that can approve anything is the city manager. And I think by the time it gets to her, after it goes from me and finance has a chance to look at it as well to make sure that there's funding in the budget, then I think it makes it easier for her to make a decision. But I think as gatekeepers on this form, Sherry and I have done an excellent job in determining whether or not an employee should go through Marathon, or, I'm sorry, a contract worker should be hired, or if we should hire direct.
Because that's certainly the intended
As Nancy would put it, I think we wire brush them pretty well.
wire brush them. I like it. I
directors.
like it. And so, and maybe you can just help me, is part of that even for you guys, really when you start looking at the length of time? Is that's one of the driving forces for you? Because I know that was for me when we looked back through them and said, wow, that guy was on a contract employee for 5 years. And he was working at our place, da-da-da-da-da-da. And maybe that really falls into the issue of the definition piece that the DA's office is looking at, is to that finite piece for me, is should that have been an employee versus a contract?
Right, Todd Reese, Deputy DA for the record. Supervisor Bagwell, you're absolutely right. That's one of the things that I'm kind of looking into. I'm blanking on the national agency that I looked at, but their Department of Labor, their website wasn't necessarily very helpful in regards to temporary employees versus permanent employees, as opposed to contractors versus employees. So I simply need to do more research and find out what's out there as far as that distinction goes.
So one of the questions I have is, so if he comes up with a definition, that would be enough for you then, based on what the forms already have in them, you would be able to say, nope, doesn't meet the definition that was determined, and you could kick them back based on that, but you wouldn't need a form change because you could just use his definition to weigh it and say it doesn't meet X or Y, and no form change then would be needed.
We could do that, but a form change really takes like 2 seconds. And then to notify the departments, it's really simple. The problem is though, if we have seasonal employees, they might stay on for an indeterminate period of time, but we don't necessarily kick them off of Marathon so that the department director doesn't have to come back and reapply for that position. So I don't know how that would work with a definition. I'm not sure getting a definition would actually help that situation.
So refresh my memory, are when these contract positions come up, are they budgeted in advance, like in the budget year, or is there just a bucket of funds that are available for contract staff?
There is a part-time hourly bucket of funds available for the departments. Parks and Rec, who have all these different seasonal positions, obviously have pretty big buckets. Public Works have some buckets because they have projects and sometimes they need to hire hourly to fill in certain positions. But the hourlies are really pretty far and few between, and they're able to transfer money between the city hourly and contract hourly as necessary. So it's really a matter of looking at each specific instance And I think going to IFC is really the right place because we're looking at each position and why it's needed and the reason, and is there funding for it? Is it above and beyond the prior year? You know, we can ask all those questions and get all those answers, and really look at it closely during IFC.
Okay,
Whereas, I mean, before there really was no process.
right.
They just need somebody and they'd call up Marathon and get a person there, so
No, so this is a huge step forward.
huge step forward,
Yeah.
yeah. Leaps and bounds.
So further discussion?
Well, and I guess in reality, all of the procedures go into policy tech. So you could review this, you'd review it annually or whatever marker you put on this one anyway, and maybe you're testing it really through IFC over this next year to say, we missed X in our consideration, or Y, and you would update that, because I was just trying to think. So you're saying I could be the Parks Department and fill this in and just say groundskeeper, lawnmower, lifeguards, those types of positions, you might grant them that as a unilateral, and then they only have to come in and change it if they want to change the rate of pay? Is that what I got from the discussion? That you wouldn't make them come every year to fill lifeguards?
Yeah, that one's hard because lifeguards are direct hires. So we don't have anyone, no. Like I said, we only use Marathon if it's absolutely necessary, and typically it's only absolutely necessary if the person is a retiree and has to keep their hours below 1039 with the city and we want to work them full-time, or if they're making more than the salary limitations set forth by PERS, which is, I think, currently $25,500 approximately a year. So a lot of them are direct hires with the city. I'm trying to think of an instance. For example, the sheriff's office, they have Don Quillisi who oversees the inmate crews. We don't want to bring him, he's not a PERS retiree, but we don't want to bring him onto the city because he does work more than 1039 hours in a fiscal year. And we don't want to make him full-time because then we have to pay the benefits. So actually paying the admin fee is cheaper for us than to make him a full-time employee. So he's on, there's no set end date for that position through Marathon.
I think we've come miles from where we started.
Any other comments on that? No. Okay, so do we need, well, are we,
Just gonna make a motion to close 3, 4, 5, and then, what's our number on the other one? 1 and 2
1
on
and 2
the
on the
fire
fire?
overtime? Right?
Sound like a motion.
I move to close items 3, 4, and 5 on the temporary staffing audit, and items 1 and 2 on the fire department overtime hours audit.
Closing, or
As discussed. As discussed on the
as
record, though,
discussed.
so she can make the small corrections. Okay, I'll second that.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, 6B, update and discussion on selected agreed upon procedures performed by Ad Bailey regarding the social media policy creation and fee structure.
I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dan Carter. He's our partner at Eide Bailey, and Audrey Donovan, who's our senior audit partner, or not partner, senior auditor at Eide Bailey. We also have in the room here Joe Aguilera, who I believe is going to be our new partner, but I might let Dan tell you about that.
Thank you very much, Sherry. For the record, Dan Carter, I'm the current engagement partner on Carson City's internal audit. And yeah, do have an announcement to make for the committee. Just wanted to let everyone know that I'll be leaving the firm effective the last day of the month. So we do have Audrey here. She has been working with us on the internal audit. She works very closely with me to develop the audit plans that we've been going over here. and was nice enough to be able to come out for the meeting today. I believe the audit partner we've identified is Kim Higgins out of our Denver office. She's actually, I believe, in another audit committee meeting right now, so wasn't able to attend this one, but Joe was able to come over from Sacramento as kind of a backup audit partner on an as-needed basis, just given the proximity to Carson City. So maybe I'll give Audrey and Joe just a few minutes to go through their backgrounds, and if you guys have any questions or concerns, or if you guys need anything else from us on the process of replacing an engagement partner on the internal audit, definitely don't hesitate. We can make that happen.
Hi, I'm Audrey Donovan. I'm in my second year with Eide Bailey as a senior manager. I have about 25 years experience with being an auditor. I'm certified internal auditor, certified government management assurance, and certified in risk management assurance. I have also, my background is former deputy director with the city and county of Denver, Colorado, where I helped them to become #1 in the nation with performance auditing, which I understand is also on your internal audit project list as well. And I'm just happy to be here. Flew in this morning and I'll fly out this evening. And next time I'm here, I'm going to make a weekend out of it. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Joe Aguilar. I've been a partner for now some 17 years, and I've been in the municipal finance industry for 40 years. I'm the old guy in the crew. Anyway, I focus my practice in providing advisory services and outsourcing to government agencies. And I've had numerous internal audit contracts over my career at our firm. And we bring more resources to the Reno area. Our Sacramento office also audits Douglas County. We also audit South Lake Tahoe out of the Sacramento office. So we just augment the services here to make sure you have the right staffing and the right expertise as you give these assignments to us.
Okay. Will the local office still be involved in the test work?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
We'll have, depending on the staff and what engagements they're working on, we will have multiple locations to pick from. And depending on the engagement, whether that needs a subject matter expert, we have all the offices of the firm that we can tap into.
Okay, great. Questions, comments? No?
Then maybe I'll turn over to Audrey to go through the upcoming audit plans.
Yeah, that'd be great, thank you.
I think the first item is the social media creation structure.
So our first item is the social media and the citywide fee structure. We'll also be throwing in there the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, an update from, I think it's been well over a year since I think you guys have received an update on that. So I'll get right into social media, and that is to help assist the CIO and the district attorney's office with the social media policy. And we have done a cursory review of the former policy, the current draft policy, and have provided some recommendations as to how to strengthen that. We believe that it is in a condition to audit. I would call it more of an assessment than a social media audit, but to assess different facets of social media when it comes to Carson City, looking at what is the governance structure, which right now, without actually going about a formal assessment, the governance structure is really city manager and CIO. Per policy, they are monitoring social media for the city. And so we're looking to see if there's frequent meetings that are held, meeting minutes, what's the activity that comes from those. So we're requesting to move forward with an assessment of social media. Second thing is the citywide fee structure. This one, we are still trying to get our arms around gathering the necessary data to understand which city departments we would be including in the citywide fee audit. So pulling the information in from one central location does not currently exist. So that would be our first audit finding, and a recommendation is to have a centralized fee in one location. We have looked at the Muni system and attempted to culminate that data together, and it is quite labor intensive. I don't think that that is going to be the wisest use of staff time and resources. This would actually benefit the city in having one location for that. If the city were to go through an annual increase, whether it was 1% or 3.5% with cost of living, you could across the board do that across all your departments instead of having to bring up each one separately, which the treasurer is now the main source of that information and at times doesn't have the most current information. So it's going to each department individually. So that would be our first recommendation. So to move forward, we would just be looking at those key departments, Parks and Rec being one, and any others that you felt was important to include in that initial assessment.
So how far, are you guys done with the fee structure audit, or you're just?
No.
Okay. How much of the budgeted 150 hours have you guys used?
I would say we're about 10 hours into that 150.
Okay.
Just getting our arms around where all the expenditures, where the fees come into, and then which department should be included in that fee structure. So looking to you for that guidance, absent of having the one location for all the fees to do that across the board, do benchmarking against like municipalities, whether that's Parks and Rec, if it's other departments that you felt need to be included in that based on risk.
I can
I
comment a
imagine
little
there's a
bit.
lot of areas where fees come in.
I would say our largest, however, when it comes to actually a fee that's not controlled by a statute potentially, because many of our fees are actually controlled by a statute, a copy fee, a notary fee, this fee for the recorder's office. Most of those are statutorily controlled. But certainly in our park and recreation arena, one of the things we just did on a range task force was to determine a new fee structure that we wanted to work on to deal with the rifle range. Well, then when we went to the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting to then turn around and recommend those fees, then you hit a different road bump that says, oh, well, here's some resolution that the Board of Supervisors implemented 12 years ago that no one knew about, that said, set your fee structure this way, that when you look at it, doesn't necessarily make any sense. But again, there's nobody bringing it up for review. So I really like the idea of being outside of the municipal code and being brought into a fee structured thing that comes before the proper boards or the proper thing every so many, like kind of like policy tech, where we say, hey, this will be reviewed next on such and such a date. And that it forces that document to be continually reviewed and updated. So I think Parks and Recreation is very ripe for that. We have different facilities earning different rates of their operating costs. And so is it a goal? And I'm not suggesting what the answer is. It's to do the work here. But, is the theater at only 20% cost recovery, but this room is at 50%? Is the swimming pool at 60%? Do we have a consistent methodology for the fee structures? And again, do we then monitor them to determine when they're getting out of, like you said, oops, we've had too much inflation, or employee labor contracts have eaten away at that ratio of funding, things like that. So I know that Park and Rec is looking, even as the commission, Park and Rec Commission, this is very timely for them.
I think, and I agree, I think that's part of the struggle. The other part of the struggle is the fee structure review, how broad it was. For utilities, we're already doing a big fee study. So do we want to not worry about utilities and just focus on Parks and Rec for this first round? Or I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the struggle is the lack of focus for the external or internal auditors.
If I may, you know, I've done numerous fee cost studies for public agencies, cities, counties. And one of the goals is to centralize as much of the information as possible and segregate it into the different departments and functions. And then from that centralization, look at the common fees, the fees that are already being addressed, like in utilities. And the fees that are, we're stuck with the statutorial things, especially on public safety. Some of those were locked in. But on the other fees, start documenting what's the source of authorization? When was the last time they were updated? Is there even benchmarking done in comparisons? Sometimes the goals are, we want to do subsidy on like adult sports at 50%. But for youth programs, the target is more 10, but they don't, but most agencies don't mind having 100% subsidization. However, look at the different practices by department and make sure those things, starts becoming some consistency. And part of it is just documenting what you already have. Some of your departments obviously do a very good job in tracking these. Others, you know, it's been a while or there's been staff turnover. And what we hope to do is centralize the information to make it more useful. And it is overwhelming, the amount of fees that a city county does. And I'll be honest with you, you can't get to all of them. But this will be a start, and this will be a start to bring some form and structure. And then those areas that lack the form and structure, you'll have some findings from us, you know, where to start. And sometimes you'll find things that haven't been updated for quite a while, and they just haven't got around to them. You know, whether it's some of your building fees, they haven't updated, and maybe they've fallen behind. You know, like I had one agency, they were 5 years behind updating to the current building codes because they lacked staff. Everybody left, everybody was laid off, and then the economy recovers and you don't have the same staffing and you haven't got to it. So there'll be things that we will part of the look would be to identify those areas that need to be addressed. So we'll be working with Sherry to just try to centralize as much of it as we can.
So it's really, I mean, it really sounds like we need a risk assessment done first to determine what areas we want to focus on.
That was the direction, if that was a question, that was the direction we were moving in, was gathering all the expenditures to identify where the fees were likely the most activity, the most amount, and identifying that we knew Parks and Rec was going through this process of adjusting their fees, but also wanted to spread the wealth of knowledge around and also have a comparison internally. If we're seeing that things are done the same within departments, then maybe that's a good practice, or maybe it's a citywide practice. Is it something that we need to change across the board, make a recommendation towards? The first step that we had was looking at the Muni code and identifying that there's many ways that fees are presented in there with a dollar sign, and having the help of Mr. Reese here also looking at ways that we could research and mine the data out of the Muni code system, and talking with the treasurer and finding that the information is scattered, current, and some of it's outdated. So just getting that source of information to identify who else to include with Parks and Rec, so we can have an idea of where we want to make this a citywide fee structure audit versus just Parks and Rec, but that we can absolutely do this in phases and say Parks and Rec first, and we can do some benchmarking and see if we have the right fees for the rec centers. Do we have the right fees set for track and field? What are the rec centers' programs and what they're charging? So yeah, that's what we were leaning towards.
You know, I really like the idea of doing one department and coming up with a format for that department's fees and structures. Because that's obviously going to be a finding on the first audit. And then as a city, we can direct the rest of the directors to create that fee structure for their departments so that when we do the other departments, it's ready. And then, it should be easier.
I think I really like that too, but, because if I'm not mistaken, we talked about years ago on the committee that we really don't have like a revenue book that is tabbed out that might say Parks and Rec. Here are the 27 fees they charge. It's for this, it's its purpose, its goal, intended goal of that fee, and then the last time it was reviewed. That would be, if we could just, and I just pick on Parks and Rec because I know it's ready. I mean, I know it's ripe for, let's get this done. And I know that the district attorney's office is working to rewrite our codes, so we also would be saving. I just don't want to see effort put anywhere that we then turn around and have to take it all out. Because I know, for me, one of the things is I'd like to see it out of the regulation, other than a regulation that we might, or an ordinance we might pass that says, we're going to review the fees every so often. And then, but that the fee itself is not in the actual ordinance, because then it never gets done. But so I like the idea of starting with one and getting a good model to then implement. Because the other area is the building department, and looking at all of its little fees and things that are done, that again should be a nice catalog and book that the general public can go right to it and open it up and say, okay, I want to get a special use permit. Okay, that's $2,450, and that is at a 100% cost recovery, 50%, whatever the answer is. So those are the two departments off the top of my head that I think would be ripe, but I'm okay with just starting with one and making a model.
Anyone disagree with that approach? No, okay. So I'd say move forward with that. Sounds reasonable.
Thank you. So the last item on that first agenda was to give you an update on fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. This, your company is called Lighthouse, and it took us a moment to gain access to the reports that had been previously going to your former auditors. So in about the last 4 weeks, we had gained access to what the reports, issues that were coming into the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. Of that, we had identified 10 total calls over the last 15 months, of which 2 were related to Carson City and were rolled forward through Sherry Russell to the appropriate department and agency for corrective action to identify if these have been corrected and closed. One of which, I don't know how much detail I need to go into, one of which, well, they were both closed within a matter of minutes, days, partially because these had been reported so long ago, one earlier this year and one towards the end of last year, that one came through the business or the code enforcement. They were already aware of the issue that a mobile home that had been reported as being dilapidated and needing some repairs that had already been investigated and closed. Another one was with a former city employee within Public Works. That matter had already been addressed and closed with no negative repercussions to the city, nothing implicating the city in anything, fraud, waste, or abuse in either of those cases.
Thank you. All right, so we don't need anything, any kind of formal closure on B. We're
No, that was for discussion only, Mr. Chair.
okay. Yep. 6C, discuss and possible action regarding projects to be performed by the internal auditor for a period ending June 30, 2020, and recommended the Board of Supervisors moving forward with the identified FY20 audit program.
Mr. Chair, this is where we set our budget. And so you'll notice on the attachment, the citywide social media audit and the fee structure audit. Those two will come from the fiscal year 19 that was unspent, and we'll roll that budget forward into fiscal 20. So
Okay.
those two are not included in the 110,000 available for fiscal year 20.
Okay, great.
You're considering these, just to make that clear.
Excuse me, which two are being rolled forward this year?
The third
Social
item down,
media
the social media audit that we just talked
Fee
about, and
structure,
then
okay,
the
one,
audit
okay.
fee
Got
structure,
it.
yeah.
All right, so, and my understanding is what is the budget, 110,000? Is that, yeah?
Yeah, and we've spent a fair amount of time talking about these items for FY '20. Looking at it, does anyone have any questions, concerns, comments about what we had talked about previously?
So if we're looking at the list and we have $110,000 to spend, when I'd already, well, I played with it, thinking, okay, we got to get here. So if we, and it's just a thought process, because I'm not sure, I come up with I'm 2,000 short, but I still have an idea on it. So we could select the 2019 risk assessment, because I think you all wanted to, right, do that one. The citywide budget monitoring audit, the revenue and accounts receivable, skip no on the property audit. I think that's one that's pretty law-driven anyway, but the accounts payable and P-card update. We would not do network security this year because they're implementing the new ERP. Remember, we talked about that. We'll hit that one the following year because we'll have an implementation for them to query and see. Hopefully, we implemented well. Yes, on the HR administration. I would say we then would do that one this year and then put the COBRA to the next year. So no on the COBRA. Yes on the cash handling, and then the follow-up that we discussed. That puts us about, well, the difference between 17,625 and 15,412. But I would just let them adjust anywhere in the hourlies on any of these projects to bring it in. I'd say that's, you have to make it equal 110,000, so you'll need to look at the ones we're accepting and cut out $2,300-ish. So shave a few hours off of each, take it off one. I'm not sure. I'll leave that to your expert side, but unless you guys see something differently.
Question on the COBRA administration. Does the city self-administer that, or are we using an outsourced COBRA administrator?
We administer that.
Okay,
We administer that.
okay.
Well, how much do we have rollover?
The rollover is these two.
How much budget dollar do we have?
It's like 47. I did the math of the whole thing. I took, so.
Don't add up to 40.
No, it's 110,000 plus 45,887 means we can award $155,887. If we did this entire thing, it's 216,850. So doing my way, we had to cut 60, see, I did the math actually. We need to cut 60,963. I'm overstated by $2,213, in which they'll have to slightly adjust. And then we would just take the no's from this upcoming one, and they'll be the first ones we do, so they can start the following year. And then we'll have risk assessment to do our balance, or we should have results from the risk assessment, if that makes movement.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that. I mean, look at that, it hits all the things that I'm really concerned
been
about. And
talking
so,
about.
so I think that's a good way to go.
Okay.
Does that work?
Sounds good. So.
And I can
need
give
a-
you mine.
Need a motion, then,
We should almost
This-
have these things numbered, so we can say we want items number 1, 2, 3, 4.
And the math at the end. I know you think we're good, actually, I did the
That's
math.
a
but-
motion of how we're gonna just accept the projects as discussed and have to give this information.
I can.
So,
I can
I'm
do
sorry,
motion.
I'm coming out with different numbers. So, the 2019 risk assessment, the citywide budget monitoring, the citywide revenue, payables, HR administration, cash handling, and follow-up, I get 128,725.
Yeah, plus the two that roll forward.
But that 128 is 18,725 over the 110 available.
It has to be 110.
We have 110 plus 45,887 to roll forward.
I'm only rolling forward 29,375, because
Oh.
those were the only projects that are
That's
from
not what the
19
other
rolling
agenda item
forward.
says. The other agenda item said we get.
No, I said that's how much was available, but we're only rolling forward 29,375.
Right, so we really have 110 to select from this. The two that we're rolling forward are the two items in here, which is the 1175 and the 17,625.
Doesn't get to make that decision necessarily. Why can't we have the whole balance left from the fiscal year?
Well, historically, this is the way we have done it, because
I want the
that
whole money.
excess money that isn't spent goes into capital projects. So in our reestimate, we didn't estimate rolling anything. I mean, we did a reestimate and you guys hadn't spent all this money, so we didn't include all that money.
I'm just really not interested in reducing the amount of overall audit dollars that were available. So we have 110,000 a year, and I recognize that, but I really want to roll forward the whole differential just because we had a new team and some other little hiccups. I hate to lose ground on the audit progress. And so unless there's really some burning issue that I can't meet, otherwise I'd like to roll forward the whole 45,887 in the, again, and we can talk about that, but I don't want to give up on these other audit. I think we're really making ground, and I just don't want to lose the step. And I'm willing to push some of those other items to the next year, but I don't want to push a third item off for 29 versus 45. You don't think we can afford the 22-ish thousand?
We've never treated that account as a complete 100% roll forward. It's just unfinished projects from the prior year.
Right.
And so when we added those two projects, that became what was going to be rolled forward.
Right, I
So
recognize what you do in the
That's how the
norm.
reestimate was done.
Right,
So if we're now increasing that, it's going to end up at a contingency. And I think that's a whole Board of Supervisors decision.
that's fine with
So-
me. I'm willing to shoot for, we have
Well,
110,000 a year.
maybe today we can do a potential project if the whole 43 does get rolled forward. Because if it doesn't, then
Then we'll have to come back
there's
here
going
and
to be
pick
one
one
that we're
off.
not going to be able to do. So I don't know if we can approve the whole budget and then one of them, if
Well,
that's like the one that maybe, if we have the money.
Well, I guess I'm thinking, can we select just our top ones in case we don't, and
That was
then have
kinda-
that as a
yeah.
contingency? That way we don't have to come back and make a decision. So in other words, the
I know what
ones,
I was-
get our A projects going now, and the B will be dependent upon what the Board of Supervisors recommend. Is that fine?
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, we got it, yeah.
That would be over, just one project.
And if I may, this kind of dovetails into the next agenda item because we were focused on the audits that the audit committee had identified at the last meeting to bring forth audit programs for you all to look at and approve to move forward with those. But I'm hearing through this discussion that we may be moving some of the audits on or off. And if I may quickly on this budget, or maybe I'm mistaken, but in speaking with Sherry offline from the committee, I was under the impression we were going to hold the budget monitoring audit and the citywide revenue and accounts receivable audit because of recent ERP implementations. So those are two that we didn't come today with audit programs, but of which obviously we know we will be doing the audits there. We just didn't know those were the first to go.
She puts Cobra back in.
And the tax exempt property one as one of the 5. If you'd like me to go down the list real quick, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So going down the list, starting with the 2019 risk assessment, that would be on citywide budget monitoring on hold or number 2, or A or B, so letter B. Social-wide city media audit comes out of the 2018-19 budget. Citywide audit of fee structure, same thing, 18-19 budget. Citywide revenue and accounts receivable on hold, or letter B, second in the queue. Tax exempt property audit for now, letter A, first in the queue. Accounts payable and P-card audit now. Network security audit on hold. HR admin, the EE group insurance audit now. And HR admin COBRA audit now. Cash handling audit now, and follow-up now. Gets to $116,975, roughly $6,975 over the 110 that you currently have.
Well, I just don't see the need for the tax exempt property audit. That's statutorily done, and they have to complete an application and ask the assessor for the abatement. I mean, I'm just thinking I don't know why we do that one, just to.
Well, I'm wondering if that's really looking at the controls and whether it's being properly administrated, you know? I mean, if you don't have good controls, you know, I guess that could be the problem. So you'd be really focusing on that, correct? And
That's correct. And
to
it
make
is
sure it's
one-
working properly, you're not necessarily item testing any particular, just basically do they have controls so that it goes through properly? Eligibility and all.
It's a pretty cut and dried statutory application, but anyway. If anything, it's people not taking their exemptions when they don't do their forms is the biggest issue on this particular one,
Does
but
anybody remember how that came on? Dan, was this in the risk assessment? Why did this one, how did this tax exempt property audit come up?
I thought it came up just in discussion with the audit committee. I'm not sure it came out of risk
It
assessment.
wasn't top on a risk assessment issue, right?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, it did come out, it's a pretty big number, and I think it did come out of discussions in the audit committee.
Okay.
Because I pulled the last audit committee meeting,
Yep.
and it was an item you guys wanted to do, yeah.
I think you cut that out and you're in budget, but
I'm fine with it.
I'm okay.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're in agreement on that. Drop the tax exempt property audit. That takes out 100 hours.
And the thought process on the, so then that means COBRA's in and we take out monitoring audit and the accounts receivable audit. And again, on the accounts receivable, you want to wait to do the initial testing. You want the ERP to actually be implemented for a year instead of testing it quickly and finding any issues. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? If you let a whole year go by, you didn't, I'm trying to remember in the contract with the ERP and the amount of time we have to get issues fixed. So part of me looks at this a different way and says, gosh, I'd rather hit it after 3 or 4 months of implementation just to make sure we didn't miss something that we need a work fix to the system. So I just throw that out as a discussion item. If we were doing this receivable work like in next April or May, so that before you were truly closing, I don't know, would it help you or hurt you? It's really up to you, Sherry, because I know you're trying to do a lot, but I just get concerned that we have the brand-new system. You're going to want a clean audit.
Yeah.
Would this help you or hurt you? Where do you want
And a system
it?
is more of just a processing methodology, right? None of our actual procedures and who's reviewing what
It's
has
changed.
changed. I mean, people are just reviewing it in the system now as opposed to a manual signature. I think what you're going to see now, if you sent somebody in right now, is going to be a lot of cross cross-contamination because, if the workflow isn't properly set up in the system, then we're requiring manual signatures on everything. That document might be still scanned in, but we're requiring manual signatures. So it's everything's still in place, but until we get the system, where we need it to be, workflow, everything set up perfectly, sending an internal auditor in to audit us is just asking for a ton of findings.
Okay.
Because
You're not
you're
ready.
not giving us a chance to get it set up and working properly. So, I know all the approvals are there, but it's not working right now. We're only 2 months in, so as perfectly as it will be if you give me a year.
Yeah,
But you're still going to have a regular audit.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to hit you as an external audit. That did not go away just because
No.
we implemented. So you
You're right,
don't
but
see any
they'll
benefit
see-
to see any of this first. That's really,
I don't, not for
okay,
our external
that's-
auditor.
That's what I'm.
Because our external auditor won't do detailed internal control testing on the receivables and the revenue. They'll look to make sure things were approved, but they're not going to look at each item and make sure each step was followed like the internal auditor would. So, it's a good audit, but it's more high level, the external auditor. And it's
So I'm confused. So even though the new ERP system's up and running, right?
It started 7/1.
Okay. And you're saying that the new policies associated with revenue and the receivables aren't fully implemented, or?
They are. I mean, nothing has changed. There's still the same approvals. It's just a different methodology. So whether or not that approval is assigned approval or whether it's a click on a key in the system to approve it, that's the question. But the approval's still there somewhere. That's what my staff does, is make sure that the things are approved before they go in the system. I think if you send an internal auditor right now, it's going to be very difficult because it's not all in one place. We're getting there. We're going to be there. But no, we're going to get there.
And my experience with internal audit is they're there to help, and if there's
Absolutely.
issues that are being encountered, there's probably, and especially with how, from a risk standpoint, how critical this area is, having them in there at this time isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, there'll be findings, but it might mean that we'll shed more light and get things fixed quicker so that the controls are there going forward.
I do see your point. I know there's going to be findings, so I think if you give me time to fix them, then send the internal auditor in, then you can find things I don't know about. That's more helpful to me. Because I know there's little issues here and there now, and we're working forward to get them fixed. So I would rather, when I say it's good, come on in, audit me, I'm perfect. Then I find out I'm not that perfect. That's more helpful to me.
Personally, I'd say go in, start auditing this, and drop the COBRA. Just from a risk standpoint, there's more risk associated with receivables and revenue versus COBRA administration.
I agree.
And I understand your point of view that having an auditor in there shouldn't, because there'll be a control assessment done, and it may help us find the issues earlier than waiting until we think it's done and then coming in an audit and, time's passed and there's already been internal control issues arise because we didn't address it quickly enough.
And this ought to be staggered until later.
Well, that's what I said. And it might even technically be straddle the year so that she is spending this 6 months doing just what she's talking about. Because I
Still in the
see,
budget here.
but it's still in this budget and selected,
And
and
more
so they're
useful to
going
her.
to start it not maybe till April or May.
I trust
mean-
everything she's saying is perfectly right.
And I think what we're saying is too, so it's like, how do we marry both issues?
It doesn't have to
Because
start tomorrow.
well, and I
It can
hate to
start-
let things rise to an external audit finding that I'm hoping the internal auditors, that's, again, and that's the whole purpose of the internal audit. It's not, I got you. It's to fix it early so that we don't get external audit findings. I mean, that's the whole, to me, the whole point is that we are fixing it ourselves. That's why you do an internal audit. So I don't look at
Even the
internal audit.
external auditors, if we have a process in place and we find it first, it's a much less demand of a finding, than if they find it first. So that's fine. If you do April, May, I should be good by, well, before then, so.
Okay, good. Sounds like a reasonable compromise. Thank you.
I like that.
So we need a motion to, as discussed kind of motion, I guess.
So, hold on, let's just double check that we're all on the same page before, because that means they don't have all the agreed upon audit procedure, but that's okay. So we're saying yes on the 2019 risk assessment, yes on the budget monitoring, the social media and the fee structure are continuations, yes on the revenue accounts receivable, no on the tax exempt property, yes on the P card, no on the network security, yes on the group insurance, no on the COBRA, yes on cash handling, and yes on follow-up. Do we all agree that's where we went?
That's
Then I
my
can make
understanding.
that as the motion, okay. Yes? No public comment. No public to ask for public comment, but,
So do we second and approve it?
well, you have to technically ask for public comment.
Yeah, there's any public comment?
Okay, none.
Hearing none.
Motion?
Yes.
Okay, so I move approval of the 2019 risk assessment, citywide budget monitoring, social media audit, fee structure, accounts receivable, P card, HR administration of the employee group insurance, cash handling audit, and follow-up for the work program.
I'll second the motion.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay.
And Sherry will make the numbers work for 1,000 either way. There you go. And do we like their percent?
Okay, next. 6D, discussion and possible action regarding review and agreed upon procedures established by Ide Bailey and staff regarding FY20 work paper program. I believe that's.
Sorry, I'm gonna let Audrey take this. She's to go over the agreed upon procedures.
Okay, so as mentioned before, we'll have a few of the agreed upon procedures, and we will submit those going forward. For the ones that we do have that for accounts payable and P card on the very first side.
So for the record, these are just recommended by Ide Bailey. So if you have any changes or want to focus or add or remove procedures, this is that time for discussion. And then once, you guys go forward with these procedures, then that's kind of what Ide Bailey will do and bring your findings back on that.
Okay. So which page are we looking at, Audrey? 32?
Or 32. Could be her one.
Yeah.
There it is. Okay.
I didn't see any problem in the P card, did you guys?
No.
Ask the auditor over there that does them every day. All right, Michael, what are they missing?
That looks good to me.
Yeah, it did to me too.
Okay.
We're okay with internal audit. Okay, then
Cash handling.
cash handling, that's right too. Actually, the cash handling one, we had cash handling before. Is there anything in here that has where you validate that everything worked from the last findings?
The last one Moss Adams did, but I can definitely give them the Moss Adams report. And do you mind adding that step?
Yeah, I just think, yeah. So I'm just thinking they should have the last audit from both of those. Because it would be okay, but I just wanted to make sure that, yeah, it doesn't hurt to look those findings, especially because we said we closed them. And did we indeed, we saw the cash handling video that the treasurer's office did and the training and all that, but was it effective and did it work? So I guess just that you say, yes, it went well, or,
Yeah.
they trained them, but they didn't do it, or whatever would be interesting, so.
Last cash handling one was 2014, I believe,
Yeah, it's one of our early ones.
and there were a fair amount of findings, if I remember correctly.
What is it on the sheet? Yeah, we've totally closed it. It might be on the other tab.
No, they were all closed, like, maybe year and a half, 2 years ago, but, yeah, it'd be great to follow up on those.
Yeah, and I did give Ide Bailey a copy of that report already, so I don't think it's a big deal to add that step.
Yeah, and I think accounts payable was done in maybe 2016 or 17? 16?
I've been doing this a long time, you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think any time we've had it before, it should always be incorporated into the next set, because I'd hate to see you make a recommendation, we implement it and we already closed it. It's just for you to go in deeper then and say, okay, that recommendation didn't seem to take hold as well as anticipated. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll
Otherwise,
add
I'm
both
okay.
of those to both of those audit programs.
Okay. And then,
So that leaves the HR administration on the eligible employee group insurance and cash handling, if there was anything additional on either of those.
eligible. See, we pay attention, spell it right. Can't help myself, right? You read the title and go, what? I know, joy. I didn't see anything on that.
Okay, any other
No, looks good.
And then
questions?
we're not accepting the Cobra one for this round.
I'm kind of curious, when you're testing these controls, how large of a sample do you obtain?
For,
Most regards, we're going to take the entire population, particularly with these here. The data analytics software that we have has the capability to look at 100% versus sample. But if we get in there and see that it's too time intensive, we'll start to look at the sample, which would likely be 25. 25 total. Anything over 100 in the population, taking 25 gives you just as much confidence.
Confidence, yeah.
any other comments? So do we need a motion to approve the programs? Yes.
Want me to do that?
Yes, please.
Ask for any public comment that doesn't exist.
Any public comment?
We got to keep the technical
Hearing
stuff
none.
right. Okay. I move to direct Ide Bailey and staff to proceed with the agreed-upon procedures as discussed on the record today.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Yeah, can we, I'm sorry, can I ask for you to change that a little bit? Because there's two on here that Ide Bailey's not doing, the property
As
tax.
discussed
exempt.
today, we already said no to those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were,
Okay, thank you.
That's why I added as discussed.
Perfect, thank you.
okay, discussion for the next, picking the next
So-
audit committee date?
I'm sorry,
And
there's
then
a
they'll be
few
bringing back the other
procedures.
ones that will be later audits
Okay.
anyway.
So we'll
They
bring
can-
agreed upon procedures back to you next meeting for the remainder of the
That they
programs.
won't be
Okay.
hitting you until April or May.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. It's September already.
I guess my question is, when do you think you'll be at a point where you'll have enough material for us to go through and do a review?
More about ski season than when the audits will be ready. December, January, I'm thinking, yeah. Although that's like heavy holiday season too.
Yeah, we've typically had one in November every year. A committee meeting, so.
Yeah, but we're kind of already into September now, so it's like, we want at least 3-4 months, and they don't have that much,
Well, and
yeah.
I don't want just agreed upon procedures. That
Yeah.
would be a,
Yeah, we want to make it worthwhile,
Early January, maybe.
yeah.
Early January.
Yeah, we want very early
Very,
January,
very early January, yes.
first week.
First couple of weeks of January would be good.
January 7th is a Tuesday.
That's fine with me.
That's the first Tuesday of January.
I like this Monday afternoon. It never conflicts.
The 6th is a Monday. That's fine with me.
That's fine.
I'm just saying, I have no conflicts with all the other.
Monday, the 6th, 1 o'clock.
Works for me.
Okay.
Does it work for
Monday.
everyone?
Want to switch the meetings to Monday?
If we can,
Okay.
because then because somebody keeps canceling and then we all have a really tough time
It is a really
fitting
tough
our
time
schedules
rescheduling.
in. We see?
Yeah, does any date work best for you guys? Monday or Tuesday?
Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
January 6th.
So I'm here January 6th at 1 o'clock.
Gives you time to fly in the morning and then, okay.
All right, great. And public, this is item 7, public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda as an action item. Any action or no action may be taken on a matter raised under the item of the agenda. And there is no public, so hearing none. And with that, we can conclude the third quarter audit committee meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dan, Dan mentioned to me at the beginning of the meeting, his first ever audit was Carson City, 17 years ago. So
Leaving us.
we'll miss your knowledge and expertise on city operations, so. So, thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.